Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. I do believe our host controller has muted everybody to get rid of that fantastic music that I heard, and also the fire truck in the background. Stephanie, tell me when we have everyone in.
You are good to go, and you're correct. People are muted, so.
All right. Could I ask if you're a presenting partner that you do a quick little unmute, or a presenter? And Steph, do you have any rules for the road before we get rolling?
Just that I do mute everyone as you come in, but if you do have a question, just be sure to unmute yourself, or you'll see me frantically waving at you in the background.
Well, welcome to our July 21st Food for Thought. I don't even know how many days we are into COVID. I've given up counting. But we are delighted at the Community Foundation to have Nick Dedizio from Longwood Gardens talk about Longwood's reopening plans that are being implemented right now. And as a personal aside, I live right across the road from Longwood. So when I drove by and saw it open, I got on the phone as quickly as I could, and thank goodness that Paul Redmond volunteered Nick to do today's session. So Nick has a PowerPoint prepared. We're gonna have a discussion. I would like to briefly have our presenting partner say a few words because we have, I don't know, about 100 and whatever people on this Zoom call, and that's a very, very good thing. Our presenting partners are, we're going to start with what's on the handout in that order, folks. The Cultural Alliance of Chester County, which is pretty easy because that is a Community Foundation initiative. And Malcolm Johnstone, are you there? Malcolm is
yes, I'm right here.
New Senior Program Officer. He's going to be helping make the rounds and helping restore Chester County's arts, culture, and heritage nonprofits and how to get audiences back. So that will be some magic. From the Cultural Alliance in Philadelphia, who we love to reach out to for all kinds of resources and support what we're doing and run out programming. Priscilla Luce is our new interim CEO or Executive Director or Executive CEO, Priscilla, what is that?
President and CEO, the interim, as we're in transition.
Thank you very much for everything you do and offering up your staff to help us figure out in Chester County how to pull from what's going on there and learn from the best.
It's absolutely our pleasure. We're delighted to be a co-sponsor.
And you have a number of folks from the Philly Cultural Alliance on this Zoom call. So that
absolutely.
Yeah. And then Restore Chester County. Beth Harper-Brilli on the Community Foundation staff serves on that initiative. And Ernie, where's Ernie? Ernie Holling.
He's hiding up here, wave. Yeah, I chair the Marketing Communications Committee for the Restore Chester County exercise, as well as being chair of the Millette and Selma.
So double hats today. Thanks, Ernie, for everything.
Yep.
And when Cheryl Kuhn learned that we were going to be able to feature Longwood, thank goodness she jumped right in and started to reach out to Southern Chester County Chambers nonprofit organizations, as well as board members who serve on nonprofits. Cheryl, you want to say a few words?
Sure. I just would like to say hello to everyone and welcome. It's wonderful to see all these smiling faces. I'm enjoying that quite a bit and love working with Karen and the Chester County Community Foundation. It's been a pleasure and looking forward to a long relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl, for everything. You got a great newsletter. I don't know how you put so much information out so much, so often. So how about for a second, everybody look around and I have 4 screens of folks. If you want to take a moment to see who else is on the call, that's great. We're going to use the chat a lot if you'd like. And what we'll do is Nick has a brief PowerPoint presentation. We've emailed it to you, plus it's on our website. And plus Longwood wonderfully shared its reopening plan in PDF and Word format. We emailed that to you, plus it's on our website. So Nick, I'm going to let you get rolling and know full well that we have found on Food for Thoughts that people love to have questions along the way. and I encourage conversation. We'll keep you on track as well. All right. And if people don't start to break in, I will. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to the Community Foundation for inviting us to participate. So, Steph, do I just flip over to the slides?
Yes, please do.
Hopefully you guys are seeing the slides. Okay. All right, so I wanted to first just take some time and talk about sort of what happened and how we responded to everything that happened. So for us, March 14th was the day. That was a Saturday that we closed, and we were closed sort of indefinitely, like so many others. And really, at that point, we shifted everything that we were doing. So not only were we closed, but we also couldn't have staff, volunteers, part-time staff, everyone that normally would be on site. So thankfully, because we are a garden and there are living displays, we were able to petition the governor to have limited staff on site, and we were able to keep plants growing and really keep things going. But for us, we very quickly changed gears and looked at, even though we're closed and not knowing how long that closure was going to be, how could we stay engaged with the community? So number one, we looked at our website content, and we developed a section of our website called Our Gardens, Your Home, which was really where we were sharing what was happening in the gardens, what was in bloom, sort of reflective videos that we could share, education. We have a lot of education programs, so we had recordings of classes and concerts, just sharing information with people so that they stay connected and sort of were able to keep Longwood top of mind. We also were very concerned about our members. We have about 73,000 member households, so we wanted to stay engaged with them, and spring is a time where a lot of people come to visit. So we developed Longwood from Home, which was our e-newsletter that we sent out once a week to, again, keep those members engaged. And then on social media, we were sharing tons of stories of sort of what was happening, what was in bloom, what would have been in bloom in years past. So it was really important to us to keep that connection and keep communicating with everyone out there.
All right, Nick, I already have a question.
Yeah.
So your marketing staff was all working remotely at this point. Are you still all working remotely?
We are. So we've been bringing staff back, especially when we first opened. But for areas that are not critical to be on site, we're still remote. So our marketing team is all still remote. Our membership team is remote. We actually have some Hort staff who are remote and doing things at home to support our online engagement efforts. The teams that are on site now are mainly guest services. We do have facilities as well, because they're keeping the place going. And then we do have Hort staff as well.
All right, so give me some numbers too, because I like to learn from the best, and I know you are huge. How many on your marketing team? Because we all have marketing teams. Sometimes it's a half a person. How many does Longwood have on your marketing team?
Yeah, so we have 15 total, but that includes 3 people that are dedicated to membership as well. Okay. So between marketing and membership, we're 15.
And how did you produce the photos and the video stuff that you did? Did you use old stuff, or did you go in with what did you do?
So a lot of it was old stuff. But we did have, because we were able to keep very limited staff, we were able to have a few people go in every once in a while to capture some new, mainly video footage. But it was a big shift for us because, you know, being Longwood, we're very concerned about how things look. We have a high aesthetic, but we were okay with shooting, you know, iPhone footage, which is not always something that we're okay with. So we were able to have, you know, one individual person going through the gardens with a phone to give that experience of walking through some of the areas that were blooming, which normally would not be something we would do, but we really noticed that.
Okay, you answered my iPhone question. Fascinating. Yeah. Good.
Great.
Thank you.
So utilizing staff was a big thing. So after the closure, when we started to eye the reopening, which was a nice shift to do, one of the big things we had to do was get the gardens ready, because we have a staff of probably about 400 full-time, but then we have part-time, we have volunteers, and a lot of especially volunteers are in the gardens taking care of things on a daily basis. So without having those volunteers, because a lot of them are populations that were a little more prone to having problems with the virus, we did look at utilizing staff in different ways. So we started to have sign-up sheets when we could bring people back to have them sign up to water or pull weeds or do things that they are not normally doing. This is actually a shot of our CFO's administrative assistant who's in there watering. I was in there pulling weeds, and I have the utmost respect for our Hort staff now for what they do. But it was really important to us because we were limited with volunteers and part-time, and still are. So we've been utilizing different staff members throughout the organization, full-time staff members.
What's been their reaction?
People have loved it. They've loved to be able to do something different. The horticulture team has loved having a different group of people to work with. And really, so many of us have a new appreciation for how hard those teams work. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah, good.
So as we were eyeing the opening, we really needed to have understanding across the organization of what we were after. So we had a cross-departmental task force that was really working to build that document, to look at all of the different decisions that had to be made. What does reopening mean? Which audiences are we welcoming? How do we do this in a safe and responsible manner? And so one of the tricky things was the timeline and the regulations, because as I'm sure many of you know, that information was changing regularly. And we didn't have specific days to look at. So we developed a phased approach. And the phases didn't necessarily, they sort of tied to Pennsylvania's phases, but we had a few extra phases in there because there were a lot of different milestones and moments that we were looking at. We also really talked a lot about staff and volunteers and what that meant, bringing people back on site. And so to start, we were really limiting to full-time staff. So again, if you think about guest services, we have a lot of docents, we have a lot of people in the gardens who are helping guests. And we also have a very big emphasis on the guest experience, on engaging with guests and talking with guests. So we really had to shift that mindset a little bit. Number one, we didn't want to have as many people on site. And number two, we were limited with who we could really bring back, because at this point, we were only relying on our full-time staff. We weren't bringing back part-time staff and volunteers. So we actually had to develop some training for our staff, and we had everyone go through online training to talk about how to engage with guests and how to really manage your role in the gardens in a very different setting. And we talked about, and I'll get into it a little more when we talk about sort of masks and regulations and things, but it even came down to how to engage with guests about masks or social distancing, or what to do or what not to do. And it was really important to arm the staff so that they were prepared. We looked at capacities. Fortunately for us as an attraction, we have timed ticketing that we've used for a while. So we already had half-hour time slots. What we didn't have is our members, for the most part, did not have to make reservations most of the time. And because of the capacity constraints, we needed to change that. So we instituted that members had to make reservations as well as time ticketing for ticket buyers. And those capacities were set at 35% of what they could be. So it's a significant reduction to what we could see. but it's incredibly important, especially with some of the spaces that we have and managing expectations. So we set up reservations for all of our members. Everyone had to make reservations. And we tried to make the process as contactless as possible, which was really important for us, for not only the staff, but also the guests to have that experience. So what that meant for us was we had to do some work in our visitor center. So the first image is actually a pretty big shift to what our ticketing booths looked like. And we had to re-outfit the area to make sure we had the screens, to make sure people felt safe. But we also had to change the way that we processed people when they came in. We had to switch so that people were actually scanning their tickets when they came in, which was not something that we used to do. So that took a little bit of work from IT with our systems, and it was a lot of work from facilities to outfit the building. We also developed a process because our visitor center has restrooms, it's got the garden shop, there's a lot of places to stop. And especially when we first opened, we were in the yellow phase and indoor buildings were really limited. So we changed things so that the visitor center really just became a tunnel for people to walk through to get into the gardens. So we actually had people line up outside the building, and we had, you know, our signs on the ground to show 6 feet apart. And then we would let groups in 2 at a time. So they were either going to desk 1 or desk 2 to be able to scan, and then walking right through the visitor center. The restrooms are closed. The garden shop entrance is closed inside, really trying to keep people walking through and getting out of the building as quickly as possible. We also had to look at what was open, what especially had high touch points and areas where we weren't going to be able to keep up with cleaning. So when we first opened, our conservatory was closed. And again, it was during the yellow phase, and we were concerned about indoor spaces, but also we were concerned about how many people might be in there. And there's certain areas within the conservatory that are still closed, like our children's garden inside, which we would love to be open because the kids love it, but it's such a high touch area. Everyone, you know, the kids are all playing and touching everything that we knew we just couldn't possibly stay on top of the cleaning that would be necessary. So we have that area still closed now. We also had to look at cleaning and schedules. And part of this tied to why, if people were not required to be on site, why they're working from home. Because one of the things we didn't want to have to happen is our marketing offices, we didn't want the operations team to have to clean those all the time because our staff's coming in, when it's just as easy for them to be at home so they can focus on guest-facing areas. So that's part of the reason why some of our groups are still at home. But we really looked at what areas, what restrooms could be open. We're fortunate that we have a number of single restrooms, so that was easier for people. We could quickly go in there and clean them when people leave. And all of those are sort of on a rotating schedule of being cleaned pretty regularly.
Nick, sorry to interrupt, but there are a few questions in the comment section before we move on. One, some people inquired about the guest engagement training. You had mentioned that some of your employees were undergoing. Would you be able to provide a link to that or anything or later on? Yeah.
Yeah, I can share more details about that. I think we have it internally, but let me see what I can put together. I'm sure we have outlines and things that we can share.
And then someone else asked what software you are using for reservations, and would you recommend that platform?
Yes, so we use a product called Seriousware, which works really well for us. We do a lot with it. We sell our memberships, all of our scans, our admissions, all of our education programs. Like we sell a lot with it. Because we already had the system, it was very easy to roll out those reservations. If you don't use that system already, I probably wouldn't recommend implementing it because it is a rather large point of sale solution. And I think there's probably easier solutions out there. But if somebody is using it and has any questions about sort of setup and how we were able to roll that out, we're happy to talk with them as well.
Perfect. And then there was just one more question before we move on. You kind of touched on it, but someone was asking about the commercial enterprises at Longwood, like the cafeteria, the restaurants, the gift shop. Are any of those open now, or are you still having those closed off?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. So in our initial phase for the garden shop in particular, we do have an outside patio where we typically sell plants. So we did start out by just keeping it outside, and the outside was open. It was credit card only, no cash, and that worked out really well, and people were happy to have that opportunity. Since then, we have been able to open inside, but we do limit the number of people that can be inside. We also have expanded what we're accepting as far as payments. We do allow cash now, but we push the contactless payments as much as possible. So credit card or Apple Pay or those options, we really try and encourage as much as possible. For dining, we actually we're fortunate because we have a beer garden. So we have an outdoor space specifically that we can use. So when we first opened up, the only thing available was the beer garden. And we didn't even have our restaurant open. You couldn't go into, those restrooms were closed. You couldn't go inside the building. And so basically what we did was we spread out all of the tables that are out there to make sure they were further apart. We took some down. We also encouraged people that they're more than welcome to take their food and picnic in the gardens, which is not something we ever used to encourage. Yep. And actually we put together a picnic tote that people can purchase as well, and they can take it into the gardens, and that's worked out really well. I mean, the response has been a surprise from some people, but they're excited to be able to do that outside in the gardens. Same thing with the beer garden. When we first opened, it was really credit card only. We've laxed that a little bit. We're still mainly outside. We have inside available for limited seating, and that's mainly because it can get so hot and some people need a break. But we're trying to limit inside at this point as much as possible because of the restrictions that are in place with capacities. We also did develop an online ordering for the restaurant as well. So what we did was we're again using Seriousware, but we were able to use it's basically just a web page where when people sit down at their table, there's a little QR code and they can scan that. And when they do, they can then order. And the nice thing that that does is it actually puts the table number associated to that order. And then our team will run out the food so the people never have to get up. The guests can stay at their table. They don't have to wait in line. They don't have to engage as much with people to get the food. So that's still how we're operating. As I said, indoors is very limited, and it's really just seating, and it's mainly because of the heat and the air conditioning needs. Anything else before we go on?
You just had another question come in your chat. Anytime soon for outdoor music?
Outdoor music is a great question. So we do have music tied to our fountain shows that have returned, and actually just returned this past weekend. So for those of you who may not know, in the evenings in the summer, we're open this year just Friday and Saturday night until 10 o'clock. And at 9:15, we have what we call illuminated fountain shows, which are 30-minute fountain shows of our main fountain garden with lights, and the fountains are choreographed to music. This past weekend was the first weekend we started those again. We had not started them in the beginning. Our fountains were running, but there were no specific shows. We were very concerned about sort of groups gathering and being able to manage that. So we tested it out this weekend. We limited capacities, especially in the evenings, pretty significantly to make sure we didn't have too many people. And it actually worked really well. The nice thing is it's a 5-acre fountain garden, so people can really spread out. So those types of opportunities we're looking at. The tricky thing are the concerts. We are exploring, I mean, we've been talking about everything from, you know, the drive-up concerts that you're seeing at certain places or online streaming, but we haven't really nailed down anything yet. But the performing arts piece is probably the most difficult for us because it means you have so many people in a tight space, which is really hard to manage.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
Onward.
So as I mentioned, we've really looked at capacities. One of the nice things that we can do, because we have capacities for every half hour, we're really able to adjust those throughout the day. So as I mentioned with the illuminated fountain shows, we're actually really limiting the number of people that can come Friday and Saturdays from 5 o'clock on, because we want to make sure that there's not too many people hanging out. The tricky thing for us is when you have a gardens admission, there's no end time. You could stay 30 minutes, you could stay 5 hours. So we have to sort of use these tools to play around to get to those right numbers. The other thing that the capacities have helped too is we've actually been seeing, we shifted our hours when we've opened back up. So we always used to open at 9 a.m. We actually open at 10 a.m. now. And that just gives the teams a little more time to get ready. We also are closed on Tuesdays, which we used to be open 7 days a week. And again, being closed on Tuesdays allows us to really clean things, to get things ready, to be prepared for the week. What's interesting is because we're opening at 10 o'clock, the time slot that often sells out for us are those first thing in the morning, which probably ties to some of the hot weather we have as well, because nobody wants to be outside when it's 95 or 100 degrees out. But we're able to then really look at those time slots. Like we'll have a little more at 10, we'll pull it back at 10:30 a little bit to sort of accommodate how people are coming in, which has helped a lot. So one of the other things we did, so when we first opened, we only opened to members. And we made that decision for a number of reasons. Number one, members are who were supporting us from the very beginning. So we wanted to make sure that we honored them. But also we were a little bit concerned about what the gardens looked like in the beginning. Because again, we went months with very limited staff compared to hundreds of people on a daily basis taking care of the gardens. We were also concerned because when we first opened, we didn't have all of those experiences we would normally have in the summer. So we didn't have the fountain shows. We have the beer garden, but typically we'd have live music there, and we don't have live music now. Although I should say, since someone asked about music, that is one area that we're trying to see if we can figure out this summer, is to bring back live music in the beer garden, because it's not, it's really just an add-on for the people who are sitting there. We don't get as big of a crowd, and we can limit that a little more. And it would be like 1, maybe 2 people performing, but a much smaller group. So we did limit it to members only in the beginning. One of the things we saw as a side effect was we sold a whole lot of memberships those couple weeks, because people realized they could become a member and then come. Which was sort of a nice thing that we did not plan on. We actually don't fundraise as an organization. So membership is sort of the closest we come to that support message. So we really wanted to stay connected with members as well. And one thing I will mention, when we shut down back in March, we closed our e-commerce solution. And that it was the easiest way to sort of turn everything off, because we knew we were closed. But what that meant was we also couldn't sell or renew memberships. And if we had to do it again, I would definitely not do that. It took us a while to open those memberships sales back up, but we opened them up before we opened. We opened them up probably late April. And we saw people who were renewing and using that as a way to support the garden and help us. And it was another revenue stream. So if something like that happens, continue your membership fundraising efforts, because people really want to support an organization during a time like that. So after a few weeks, we decided to open to ticket buyers. So they opened, we opened to ticket buyers on July 1st, right before the July 4th holiday. And it's worked out well. We have seen a lower percentage of ticket buyers than we would have before. We're continuing to see a lot of members come, which is great. It's what we want. But we also, from a process standpoint, we put a lot in place, because for people to come, they had to purchase a ticket in advance. So they either had to have their ticket or their member reservation in advance. We weren't making them on site. So when you actually pulled into the parking lot, we had staff there who were checking to make sure you had your ticket, because we didn't want people to get all the way to the front and then have this difficult situation in the building. So that was something that we kept for probably about 3 weeks. We have, just starting last week, we're now allowing on-site transactions. But again, we are really encouraging people to do that beforehand. And we're seeing some time slots sell out, so it sort of motivates people to do it beforehand as well, to make sure that they can get the time that they want to be able to visit. As far as the experience goes, this really ties to that cross-departmental team and looking at all of the experiences and how we can deliver. So to start, we were really focused on outdoors. Our conservatory was closed. Since then, we have opened up the conservatory. The thing that's in our benefit with the conservatory is it is the summer and it's hot. So a lot of people don't go to the conservatory because it is very hot. But we do keep a really close eye on capacities. And we also have a one-way flow in the conservatory to try and limit people's interaction as well. And as I mentioned, there are still some experiences that are closed. One of the things we did was we have the Webb Farmhouse, which is out in our meadow. That was closed because it was an indoor experience, but we ended up opening that back up because, again, it's hot, it's summertime. If people are taking a couple-mile walk through the meadow, a lot of times they need a break. So we've tried to balance sort of guest needs with trying to limit exposures and keeping things as safe as possible. And then we hit on the dining and retail as well. We do, depending on what happens with dining, that's a regulation that's gone back and forth a little bit. Our hope is eventually to be able to open up inside and have a similar sort of online ordering experience and not having people waiting in lines. But we're just not there yet based on how the regulations have gone.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
Oh, yep.
Question for, oh, sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
It's okay. I was just going to share something, question from the chat. So we have somebody in the chat asking what kind of numbers are you seeing attendance-wise, and are they rising over time? And also a quick question about your revenue. Where are you with revenue overall, and how does that compare to where you were last year in July?
Sure. So as far as attendance, since we've opened, we've had 84,000 people visit, which averages about 3,000 a day, which is pretty good with how we're limiting capacities. I mean, those are they're not busy days. We in the summertime, we could easily have a 10, 11, 12,000 person day, but we're still seeing a lot of people come and visit. As I mentioned, we're limiting our capacities. So this past weekend, when we had our illuminated fountain shows, on Friday and Saturday each, I don't think we surpassed 4,000, and we had sold out time slots. And if that was a normal July and we had sold out time slots, we easily would have had 11 or 12,000 people. So we're seeing the demand. We're actually limiting it on our side. We were seeing most of the attendance coming from members. However, now that we opened up our illuminated fountain shows this past weekend, we actually started to see that shift, and we were seeing more single ticket buyers come, which is great because they're the ones who are paying to come. So to go to the revenue question, that's really been helpful for us. On the revenue side, very quickly in March, we all got together to talk about our different departments and our budgets, and we really slashed our budgets very quickly. What we were looking at is we put scenarios together. We call them the worst case scenarios. Our fiscal year is October 1 to September 30. And so we were looking at, if we didn't open through September 30th, what would our budgets look like? And that was really for us to be able to pull back on the expense side as much as possible, to see what we absolutely had to do and what we could pull back on. Part of that, we did make a commitment to our full-time staff that they would all still be around through the fiscal year, which was something that was really important to us to make sure that they weren't worried about that. But part of that scenario meant that we were assuming we had no revenue coming from our single ticket buyers, which is a big portion, especially in the summer. Also restaurant and the shop as well. So we built that as the baseline, and we looked at what does that mean, revenue to expense. And actually, it wasn't as bad of a situation as we thought, because we were able to save quite a bit on the expense side. Still not a good situation. We were still in the negative, and it meant a heavier reliance on our endowment, which is a good position that we're in to be able to do that. Since then, we also then looked at different scenarios for opening and what revenue could look like. So part of the reason why we're really limiting staff to full-time is, number one, to limit the exposure and how many people are on site, but also looking at the expense side and trying to limit those expenses as much as possible. So since really we had no revenue starting on March 14th, the end of April, we were able to bring back membership revenue. We also, a lot of the different departments tried to get as creative as possible with some of their offerings. So we had a few online education programs that we were able to sell. There were little incremental things. But then when we announced that we were opening back up, that's when we really saw an uptick, especially on the membership side. We weren't selling tickets, but our members were renewing, and we were seeing that support from our members. Since we've opened up, it's been slow on the ticket revenue, but as I mentioned this past weekend, it was encouraging to see now that the illuminated fountain shows are back, we're seeing more on the single ticket buyer side, which is good to see. And I will say on the membership side, we did also extend memberships. So that was really important to us, that members didn't feel like they were missing out on those 3 months that we were closed. So we extended all active memberships for the length of the closure. So during that time when we were closed, members didn't actually have to renew. They were still active members, but they were renewing more as support for the gardens, which was great to see. So we're still paying very close attention to revenue. We still have really tight purse strings right now through the end of the year to make sure that we're really only spending where we need to. But it has been, we're hopeful seeing that we're seeing those ticket buyers come back, and membership has been performing well.
And we have 2 more quick questions in the chat.
Sure.
Someone asked, how do you handle all the Sprout excitement in the midst of restrictions? So I guess.
That is a great question. So I'm just gonna jump down here to, this is Sprout, in case anyone doesn't know. So it is, the plant itself is a very rare plant from Sumatra. It's very difficult to grow. This is actually a 6.5-foot bloom that you're looking at there. It's hard to tell in the picture. And it's nicknamed the corpse flower because when it opens up, it emits a really terrible smell, like rotting flesh, to attract pollinators. So just with our luck, we found out a few weeks ago that this guy was going to bloom, because they are very difficult to know when a bloom is going to come because it sends up a shoot, and the shoot could just be a leaf shoot or it could be the bud. We haven't actually had one to bloom at Longwood since 1961. So it was a big surprise and threw our plans through a loop because we had to deal with this plant that was blooming. So we had a lot of conversations about what that meant from an operations standpoint. We still felt very strongly that we needed to limit capacities during that time. But we very quickly realized most of the people that were coming during this time were coming to see this plant. So we ended up creating lines very quickly, and we were able to have sort of 2 lines coming through. But the lines could take up to 4 hours for people to see the plant, and we had people wait. But we did make sure we had, this is again a place where we called in extra staff. So I was there last Tuesday night answering questions and keeping people separated in their line. But we made sure that people were 6 feet apart, socially distanced in line. We made sure that we had sort of water and things available because they were also really hot days. And we limited capacities as much as possible. We also, it was a tough time for the staff because if people were in line, we wanted to make sure we didn't close and they missed out. So if you were in line, we stayed open until everyone made it through the line. And there were some nights where we were closed at 1:30 in the morning because it took that long for people to get through. But if you have a big exhibit feature like this, now is probably not the time to bring it out if you can control that. Unfortunately, we couldn't control this one. We had a phenomenal response. We also, because of the situation, we did a lot online. We had a webcam that was following Sprout for a long time so people could actually see when the bloom started, because that was the other tricky part. We didn't exactly know when it was going to open. And a lot of people were engaged online. A lot of people, you know, a lot of the conversations online were that they were glad they were able to see it because they didn't feel comfortable coming, because we do hear that sometimes people, you know, certain people still don't feel comfortable going to an attraction. But it was, we learned a lot throughout the process, but we really made sure that we were following the same regulations. We were limiting capacities. We were enforcing masks, enforcing the social distancing during it.
Thank you. And then we have one question from Karen in the chat.
I can actually rephrase it.
Okay, you can ask it if you want.
What gets me is how fluid everything changes with COVID. And as nonprofits, we're, you know, how often does your COVID response policy team meet? It sounds like every hour you guys are turning on a dime.
Yeah, we do meet. Typically it's been weekly, but there's very, very often last minute, we need to meet today. Can everyone get together? And everyone, you know, it's a huge focus. So everyone does jump on right away. One of the things I will say that we did that I would recommend, because things do change so often, we made the decision early on to build out a visiting tips page that really holds all of those sort of rules and information about safety and things like that. And we point everything to that. So we have that URL in a lot of different places and we keep pointing to that. What that helps us with is we have one place to update when things change, because things have changed a lot just since June 18th, since we've opened. So if you're able to sort of funnel people to a web page, it's much easier to do that than to keep changing all these different places, which has helped us. We have, because regulations have changed so much, we have changed a lot. One of the things we learned really quickly was the hottest topic was going to be masks. So again, a piece of advice, I would be as clear as possible in your communications about masks. We went out first saying that masks are required for entry, and very quickly got a lot of feedback on both sides. People were mad that they needed a mask. Other people were mad that we weren't enforcing a mask all the time. And we realized that it was just a little ambiguous. What we meant to say was, for you to enter the gardens, you have to walk through the visitor center, which is an indoor building. So you need to have a mask to come in. But we weren't enforcing at the time outdoors. Now, the regulations have changed there as well. So our policy really aligns today with what the governor's office is saying, that masks are required inside, masks are required outside if you're not social distancing at least 6 feet away. So we've kept that policy out there. But I will say that is probably the toughest thing that we hear the most about, and it's on both sides. It's sort of a lose-lose situation. But what has worked for us is really to align with the regulation so that it's not an arbitrary policy of ours. We're following the rules.
So Nick, how do you enforce the mask? I know in Chicago around the fountain, they have teenagers in t-shirts that say, "I'm here to help." And they remind people that they have to have their masks or leave. How does Longwood enforce that today?
So because you have to enter through the visitor center, we make sure that every person has their mask to come through. So if you don't have a mask, you cannot enter the gardens. And we do have some disposable masks, so we can give them to someone, but that is part of the policy. When they are in the gardens, we're trying to limit as much of confrontation as we can, but we are reminding people, we have people stationed at sort of tighter spots because we're over 400 acres open to the public. So there is a lot of room for people to spread out. But there's certain places where it is tighter. One of the things we did for the fountain shows in the main fountain garden is we did have people stationed at sort of those entrances to remind people that they need to put their mask on. And we did have people walking around as well, reminding people to put their masks on as well. So it's something that we continue to do and hear about.
Tough one.
Yeah.
Okay. What else do you have, sir?
So one of the other big things for us was signage. And again, this reinforces some of what we were talking about. For us, we really tried to be as short with the words as possible to make it as simple as possible. We used icons where we could, but we got the dots that are placed around in lots of places. We have these hurricane signs that show about social distancing, the map, things like that. So we tried to share information wherever we could. We do have certain areas where they're too tight, so we had to do one-way pathways. And we're using signage and the dots to share that as well, just to try and alleviate as much interaction as we can where there doesn't need to be. And for us, we really wanted to make sure that we were setting expectations right. We wanted people to come and enjoy the gardens. You know, it's a beautiful outdoor place. Wellness, safety, respite, beauty is incredibly important to us. So we built a campaign around getting back to beauty to launch with. But we wanted to make sure that people understood it's still that, but there are some things you need to think about in today's world. So we tried to be friendly and helpful in our tone, use simple language, build out safety guidelines for masks, social distancing, hygiene. We did find that there were lots of questions about what we're doing to keep people safe. So we've had not that we've had to, we have gladly shared a lot about, our capacity management, how we're encouraging people with the mask, with social distancing. So we've been sharing that information quite a bit. We also really looked at the application of this across the gardens to make sure there was consistency. We do have an online map, so we were able to use that because we've taken away really all the paper that we would have had. We go through a whole lot of paper maps, but we just didn't want people to be touching all those different areas. So we're using the online map. I don't think everyone loves it because it's a little bit of a different experience, but it has been really helpful to try and share the information. And again, using the website, it's much easier to update the website than a printed sign or something like that. So we're using that as much as possible. And for us, we really wanted to, in that first phase, focus on our members, and we saw that was a lot of goodwill from that as well, which was great to see.
Nick, what about volunteer usage? What are plans for volunteers?
Yeah, so we continue to be very judicious about bringing back volunteers. So we have over 800 volunteers. At this point, I believe the number is about 75 that we're actively working with. So a lot of that had to do with, number one, people's comfort level, because we wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything where people weren't comfortable. But also we looked at places where we knew they would be safe. They weren't engaging with guests. A lot of those volunteers are doing sort of behind the scenes horticulture work. We have a huge volunteer team who are volunteer photographers, for instance, and we've only brought back 3 of them to really be as judicious as possible. Some of the volunteers are actually doing work at home. So one of the areas that our volunteers help with is in our membership department. They help with all the stuffing of our fulfillment envelopes when people buy a membership. And there's a couple people who are actually stopping by, picking up supplies, taking them home, working on it at home, and bringing them back. So we have, there's a number of activities like that where people still wanted to help, but they didn't quite feel comfortable coming on site. So we're trying to utilize people in different ways, but we still are very limited with the number of volunteers.
To be expected.
Yep.
Good.
And so we talked a little bit already about the numbers that we've seen. We've also, we do a post-visit survey to everyone that visits, and we really use that to gauge the experience. We did make changes to that before we opened to ask questions a little bit differently. One of the big measures that we use is a Net Promoter Score, which I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but basically it's the question that I'm sure you've seen where somebody asks, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend X to a friend or colleague? So your scores are anywhere from a -100 to a +100. And the higher the number, the better people are satisfied with the organization. So we typically see about a 90 NPS, which is really strong and something we're really proud of. Since we've reopened, we saw a little bit of a dip. We're at about 87, 86 or 87. Still a very positive number, but we do hear a little bit of feedback from people. We also added a question specifically asking how comfortable people felt when they were here from a safety and wellness standpoint. And that's on a 10-point scale, and averages are about 8.9, so almost 9, which is pretty good. We're feeling pretty good about that. We do hear though in our surveys, some people wish we did more with masks and social distancing. Some people wish we did less. So there's a little bit of both sides. It is really tricky, but I would encourage people as you're thinking about, especially with the mask policy, to be consistent across the board. And for us, when we were able to align to the specific government regulation, that was much easier to be able to talk to versus it being just a Longwood policy that we came up with.
Hey, Nick, do you get monitored by the state or county as far as compliance with the mask mandate or anything?
Not that we know of. we haven't seen anything. Yeah, we haven't seen anything.
Mm-hmm. You also had another question about business interruption insurance with canceled contracts for entertainment. How do you handle that?
For entertainment, the
Yeah.
canceled contracts? Yeah, so for us, most of the performers that we had lined up, a lot of them were actually coming to us at first to see about the cancellation. So we really haven't had problems canceling. The couple places that we did, people were very willing to, for us to commit to the following year. So we have a few performers that we have lined up for the next year, but we really didn't run into too many issues. One of the reasons why we made decisions though pretty early, because we canceled performances when we closed on March 14th, we actually canceled performances through the end of April.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, we canceled performances all the way through the summer.
Right.
And the reason was we didn't want to get into a position where we were sort of running out of time and having to cancel last minute and have financial obligations. And we wanted to make sure that those performers knew what the situation was as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a tough thing to roll out at the time, because we did get some pushback from people saying, why are you canceling through the summer already? But I think everyone understands in the situation that we're in right now, it definitely was the right move. And from a financial standpoint, we just couldn't commit to things that then we would end up being responsible for the fees with no revenue coming in.
As you look ahead, you're also planning for the holiday season crowds, aren't you?
We are. So yeah, we talk a lot about Christmas. So Christmas is our busiest season. Typically it's about 46 days. And last year, I think we did 410,000 people within that time period. So we average, it ends up being almost 10,000 people a day. So we expect to not be able to have those numbers. We do already have in place, because Christmas ends up being so busy, we do have time ticketing in place. We do have our member reservations in place. So we're looking at what the capacities need to be able to limit the crowds, because we expect that we're going to be limiting. It's not necessarily going to be that there's not going to be demand. So we've, as we've looked at the capacities, the other thing we need to look at is we have a south lot that we use for parking, especially at Christmas time, and we shuttle people back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
And today we can't really do that. Who knows what'll happen at Christmas time, but that's not something we can do. So that limits how many cars we can park as well. So we are definitely still going to have Christmas. It's still going to be an amazing display, but we are we're going to be pulling back on capacities and really looking at how much we can handle during that time.
In a very strange way, it makes Longwood much more comfortable and relaxing for smaller crowds. Financially challenging, but for the visitor experience, incredible.
Yeah, there are times that it has been absolutely beautiful, because you're coming and it's much less, many less people in the gardens, and you're not having the experience you might have had before.
Do we have any more questions before we wind this up? Oh yeah, a question from Cheryl at the Chamber. For Christmas, percentage members versus single ticket buyers, what's your usual?
So usually we actually see more single ticket buyers during Christmas. It's one of the few times where we do. So we typically see throughout the entire season, our members will make up about 40% of visitation, and then about 60 ends up being single ticket buyers. On any given day, it varies, but as you can imagine, those busier days end up being more single ticket buyers. The weekends, the time between Christmas and New Year's, that ends up being more single ticket buyers.
Just in from Michelle Venema at Home of the Sparrow. She wants to do Christmas and July ticket sales at Longwood. And I'm sure she's going to want a percentage to go to Home of the Sparrow. You think about Christmas in July reservations?
Not something we have thought about, but anything's on the table these days.
Can you get Christmas reservations now? That's the question, Nick.
Yeah, we don't currently have them now. We've actually, because of the so many unknowns, typically we would have tickets on sale for a long time, but we've actually limited how far out. So when we first opened, we only had a couple weeks available, and we've sort of been adding to. So right now you can purchase tickets through the end of August, but that's it. We've sort of been limiting what's available just because as we're trying to figure everything out, it gives us a little more flexibility to be able to change things if we need to.
Nice, nice. Nick, you did a great job being very forthcoming in a very short time.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for your chat room questions too. If you have more questions, now's the time to type it out. It is 2:15, so it is our time to be respectful and take a bow. I thank you, Nick. Everybody, good clap. You really did a nice job putting forth information. And the recording is available on our website, right? Is that true? Steph, how are you getting this information out to folks who couldn't hear this today?
So we currently have the presentation as well as Longwood's reopening plan on the website. We don't necessarily put the recording on the website because it is pretty large, but if you are interested in it, please email us independently and we'll see that you get it.
Do some kind of link. Yeah, I thank you so much for this, and keep going, keep pivoting on a second's notice, and we look forward to seeing you virtually all the time and in person soon. Very good. Thank you, everybody. And Nick, please, onward with Longwood Gardens. Thank you.
Thanks.
Be safe, be healthy, do great.